As someone born in the late 90s, I grew up during what many would consider to be the golden age of video game mascots. You know, marketable characters like Pac-Man or Mario, who act as the face of their own franchises, often representing an entire studio or company in the process. There were a flood of these in the late 90s and early 2000s, ranging from well-known icons like Sonic the Hedgehog and Crash Bandicoot to long-forgotten has-beens like Gex the Gecko.
Would Cheech and/or Chong report to the front desk?
Yeah. Amidst the crowd, however, there's one mascot whose story has always fascinated me. A character who once fronted one of the most popular franchises in gaming, only to be shot in the chest, dragged through the mud, and left for dead on the side of the road for years. One who's defied the odds of the gaming industry, surviving multiple poorly received reboots, droughts, and corporate acquisitions before somehow coming out the other end with a brand new game releasing next year. I'm of course talking about a little purple dragon named Spyro. The Dragon. Created as a pseudo-mascot for the original PlayStation, the initial trilogy of Spyro games released between 1998 and 2000 were critically acclaimed system sellers, helping establish Sony's console as the premium gamer brand that it is today. I'm about to fall over right now, oh my god. It was an incredibly popular series that, for a few years, easily stood toe-to-toe with legendary franchises like Mario, Sonic, and Crash Bandicoot. But somewhere along the way, things went horribly wrong. Spyro's fall from grace is a tragic tale of corporate abuse and neglect, a series of deeply unfortunate events that led to a near 20-year-long hiatus. And while he may finally be back, it was a long road to get to this point. Today, in honor of his recent return, we're looking back at the history of Spyro the Dragon, from his humble beginnings to whatever the hell this ugly thing is, in search of answers as to what extinguished and eventually reignited such a beloved icon. Our story begins in 1997 with a small little indie studio known as Insomniac Games. Nowadays, they're highly regarded as one of the most prolific development studios in the industry, but at the time, they were just a small, inexperienced team with but a singular game under their belt, the fairly obscure Doom ripoff Disruptor. Seeking to bounce back from the commercial failure of their first project, they decided to pivot towards creating a 3D collectathon platformer for the PlayStation that could help Sony compete with Nintendo, who were like the kings of this type of game. For those out of the loop, 3D collectathons are all about, well, collecting things. Shocker, I know. You traverse large open environments in search of collectibles that you'll need to unlock more levels so you can collect even more collectibles. You know, real hoarder shit. These types of games were a dime a dozen at the time. But when the first Spyro the Dragon game released in 1998, it was clear that there was something special about it. I mean, first of all, you're a dragon, right? You can breathe fire on command, glide through the air, charge around at high speeds, smashing through treasure chests and enemies with your sick-ass dragon horns. It's freaking sweet, Lois. Controlling a quadruped in a 3D platformer was an incredibly novel concept both at the time and today, and I'm happy to report that they pulled it off flawlessly. The movement is super fast and fluid, and the levels are designed with lots of verticality to glide around in and large open spaces to charge through. There's a real flow to it all. You also have a dragonfly companion, Sparks, who acts as your health bar in the game. Each time you take a hit, he changes color from gold to blue to green before disappearing altogether, but you can always replenish him by flaming sheep and other fodder, which free butterflies to feed to him. This is probably the single most recognizable mechanic from the entire series, really selling the feeling of being a fire-breathing dragon while still retaining a cute, whimsical charm. Like all collectathons, the main goal is to collect as many trinkets and doodads as you possibly can, ideally all of them if you want to fully complete the game. However, Insomniac Games injected some real crack into the collectathon formula here. Unlike other platformers, where collectibles are more spaced out across the levels, in Spyro there's hardly ever a moment where you're not collecting stuff. Each level is stuffed to the brim with colorful gems found scattered all over the ground, as well as inside every enemy and the countless breakable treasure chests plastered everywhere. Pretty much every new inch of level you explore is flooding your dopamine receptors with these shiny jewels, providing a constant and satisfying sense of visual progression that to this day remains unmatched in any other game. And these aren't even the main collectible. In Spyro 1, you're tasked with rescuing frozen dragon Fallen Elders who have been encased in stone by the game's main villain, Nasty Gnorc. Or, sorry, Gnasty Gnorc. Like gems, these are just hidden around the levels, but they're far more rare to find and contain more value as you'll get a short, charming interaction with each one you rescue. Usually they'll either share hints and secrets or try to tell Spyro some long-winded, back in my day story, which of course he never has time for.
Pass through this fancy vortex thingamajigger. It'll take you back to the artisan home. But first, let me tell you a story.
No thanks. See ya.
Hell yeah, purple dude, fuck those boomers. This goes a long way in making the main collectible feel more special, giving you an extra dopamine hit once your brain inevitably starts to get used to the constant inflow of gems. However, as fun and special as the main gameplay may be, it's really the vibes that set Spyro apart from the crowd. Insomniac Games used the primitive polygonal graphics of the PS1 to their advantage, crafting these surreal, colorful, dreamlike environments full of cute characters and breathtaking skylines. The Spyro trilogy in general are known for having some of the best skyboxes in all of gaming, featuring beautiful collisions of intense colors mixed with bizarre, trippy elements like alien planets and solar eclipses. It's all just abstract enough to get your imagination flowing. Truly an example of low-poly graphics being utilized as a coherent, intentional art direction. There's also the fantastic music composed by Stuart Copeland, drummer of the 80s rock band The Police. You might know them for huge hit songs like Every Breath You Take, Roxanne, and Message in a Bottle, but believe it or not, it's his work on Spyro that Stuart often cites as his proudest career accomplishment. He crafted a unique sound for the series that's hard to describe but perfectly captures the character and his world. It's heavy on percussion with lots of organs, electric guitars, keyboards, chimes, and bells. And while the songs he composed are actually pretty complex musically, they're also very catchy and stick in your head. I'm pretty much non-stop jamming through every level in the game. To me, the otherworldly music combined with the colorful, dreamlike art direction is the true magic behind Spyro. These are genuinely some of my favorite video game soundtracks of all time. I've been playing them throughout the video so far, but here's just a few more examples to help sell the experience. With Spyro 1 being a huge success for the PlayStation, it was inevitable that we would eventually see some sequels, and over the next 2 years, Insomniac Games would expand Spyro into a trilogy. Spyro 2 and 3 are both excellent titles that build off the same magical foundation as the original, retaining the same whimsical art direction, Stuart Copeland music, and constant flow of gems while expanding the world and gameplay some more. Spyro was given new abilities like swimming, climbing, and a post-glide flutter jump. New iconic characters were introduced like Hunter, Allura, Moneybags, and the Professor, and Spyro 3 even gave us multiple new playable characters. The biggest changes were to the way main collectibles were rewarded, with Spyro 2 locking its main collectible, orbs, behind minigame challenges offered by NPCs in each level, instead of just scattering them around to be discovered. This injected some more variety into the typical Spyro gameplay, but kind of took away from the simplicity of just running around looking for the dragon statues. Luckily, Spyro 3's main collectible, Dragon Eggs, found a nice balance by hiding half of them around the levels like in Spyro 1, but still reserving half of them as rewards for challenges like in Spyro 2. Either way, these sequels ruled, and quickly turned Spyro into an icon. By the year 2000, Spyro had become a household name in gaming, and it's easy to see why. Each release in the trilogy had amazing music, surreal art direction, and charm coming out the wazoo, all on top of a satisfying gameplay loop that's yet to be replicated in any collectathon game before or since. So how did they fuck it all up? Well, folks, buckle up, because this is where the story of Spyro gets interesting. See, while Insomniac Games created Spyro and the Sony PlayStation held exclusive publishing rights for the first 3 entries, neither party actually owned the IP rights. Those were actually held by Universal Interactive. So when the contract ended and Insomniac Games moved on to bigger and better things, Spyro fell fully into Universal's custody. Universal knew they had a cash cow on their hands, and boy were they ready to milk it dry with yearly Spyro releases on every game console available at the time. The first taste we got of post-Insomniac Spyro came in the form of a duology of Game Boy Advanced games known as Spyro Season of Ice and Season of Flame, released in 2001 and 2002 respectively. Developed by Digital Eclipse, these games did their best to faithfully recreate the Spyro formula on a 2D handheld console, but unfortunately the best case scenario for Spyro on Game Boy is still pretty bad. The biggest problem is really just the isometric camera angle. I mean, it makes platforming nearly impossible due to the lack of depth perception, and it leaves the player unable to really look at their surroundings at all. It doesn't help either that there are no surroundings, because the levels are built by looping the same assets over and over and over again. So there's no landmarks or anything, and you'll get lost pretty easily. I mean, look at this map, man. I've been to airports that are easier to navigate than this. What the fuck is this? That said, as mid as these games are, and they are mid, it's really more the fault of the Game Boy's limitations than the fault of the developers. So most people weren't too worried about the future of our favorite purple dragon based on these clunkers. I mean, we all knew that the 4th main entry for home consoles was just around the corner, and this time for the PlayStation 2. Whoa, and the GameCube? We're so back, guys. Spyro the Dragon is so fucking over. It's so over, guys. Oh my god. Spyro Enter the Dragonfly, the 4th main installment in the series, is one of the worst video games ever made. Oh my god. At first glance, it's just more Spyro, right? I mean, okay, the graphics are kind of ugly, sure, I'll give you that. And the level design is, okay, that's definitely worse, oh my god. And the controls are slower. Okay, wait, is this game only running at 10 frames a second? What gives? Hang on, how did I just clip through the fucking ground? Did it just crash on me? Oh no. Oh no. This game is not finished, guys. It's not finished. Like the infamous Sonic the Hedgehog 2006, Spyro Enter the Dragonfly is a glitchy, buggy, unstable mess that can hardly be qualified as a finished product. Hell, at least with Sonic 06, for as broken and unfinished as it is, it at least has, like, a finished skeleton, you know? Like, all the content you'd expect from a 3D Sonic game is there, it's just really bad. Enter the Dragonfly is equally broken and glitchy, but it doesn't even have that finished skeleton, only containing one single world with 9 total levels. For reference, Spyro 1, the first game in the series, had 6 worlds with 35 total levels. That's a bit of a difference, if you ask me. It's like the alpha build of the first world of a Spyro game, not a finished product ready to be sold on store shelves for full price. So how did this happen? Well, to get the full picture, I'd recommend watching the Matt McMuscles video that I've linked down in the description below. But the long and short of it is this. Universal tasked 2 completely inexperienced studios with making the next Spyro title. Check 6 Studios and Equinox Digital Entertainment. Neither studio had ever successfully made a game before, and both shut down immediately after its development, making this travesty their only ever accomplishments. Clearly a great choice to hand the next big Spyro game over to these guys. Throw in tons of corporate micromanagement from the suits at Universal, several development restarts, and multiple missed paychecks, yes, I'm serious, and it's easy to see how we ended up with this mess. The game was ultimately rushed out for a holiday release, which not only ended up killing public trust in the Spyro brand, but also drove away most of the remaining talent working on the series. Tom Kenny, the voice of Spyro, left the role behind after the failure of this game, as did composer Stuart Copeland, claiming to not even recognize what he was playing as Spyro anymore, and feeling that he and the new developers were just not on the same page. Despite being a broken, unfinished mess, Enter the Dragonfly actually sold well enough for the series to continue limping along, at least for a little while, although things would never really be the same again. After a third Game Boy game released the following year in 2003, the original Spyro formula would be retired in favor of reinventing the wheel with increasingly more radical revamps. The first of these attempts would be 2004's Spyro: A Hero's Tale, which was actually my first console Spyro game. I hate it. Okay, look, it's a much better game than Enter the Dragonfly, I'll give it that. It's an actually finished game that runs and plays fine, but sadly, the Spyro magic is just gone here. The aesthetics are totally generic, lacking that cutesy, dreamlike surrealism that defined the earlier titles, and the absence of Stuart Copeland's music is a huge blow to the franchise. The soundtrack in this game isn't bad, there's some memorable tunes here and there, but it all just sounds like generic stock music you could hear in any licensed PS2 game. It doesn't have that unique Spyro vibe at all. They also changed the gameplay formula in ways that made the experience far less satisfying. Gems are now a respawnable currency instead of being a real collectible, levels are interconnected in an open world instead of being accessed through magic portals, and the overall focus is shifted away from collecting and more towards exploration and action. The writing also has a much more self-aware MCU tone to it, with constant unfunny quips and fourth wall breaks. Great, I love those. Even trying to account for these changes with an open mind, I just don't find this game fun like previous Spyro titles. It's not satisfying to 100% complete it, and even just a basic run to the final boss is frustrating and kind of sour. While A Hero's Tale reviewed decently with critics, it wasn't enough to undo the brand damage caused by Enter the Dragonfly. It sold alright-ish, but there was a clear nosedive in sales compared to previous entries, so Universal gave their developers two choices going forward. Either retire the Purple Dragon for good, or completely reboot the series from scratch and take things in a radically different direction. Times were a-changin'. We weren't in the era of Super Mario 64 anymore. We were in the era of Call of Duty, Halo, Xbox, and Mountain Dew, baby. And platformer games outside of Nintendo were getting edgier and focusing on deep stories and combat and guns and shit. If Spyro was going to survive with the times, it was going to have to change along with them. That leads us to the infamous Legend of Spyro trilogy of the mid to late 2000s. These games scrapped everything previously established in the Spyro series in favor of a full reboot, which was controversial, to say the least. The idea was to make the franchise far darker and grittier to be more like Lord of the Rings, even going as far as to cast Elijah Wood as Spyro. Yeah, that's real. It featured a deeper, more lore-heavy narrative completely disconnected from prior entries, with no recognizable characters returning other than Spyro and Sparks, who were both heavily redesigned. From a gameplay perspective, they completely left behind the series' roots and went all in on combat-focused gameplay. You aren't going to be platforming or collecting gems or whatever, you just go from room to room tediously battling waves of enemies using combos and shit. Joy. Practically nothing about these games are even slightly reminiscent of what the series was before, but they did garner a cult following of young fans who were at least invested in the lore and stories set up throughout the trilogy, even if the gameplay was pretty universally panned. Unfortunately, even fans of this iteration of Spyro would soon be burned and left behind, just like the original trilogy fans were. In 2008, the Spyro IP was acquired by Activision after a merger with Universal Interactive, leading the Legend of Spyro series to be scrapped in favor of, well, nothing. You get nothing. You lose. Good day, sir. For a short time, it seemed like that was just going to be the end. But 2 years later, Activision tasked one of their own studios, Toys for Bob, with revamping any dormant franchise of their choosing. You can probably guess which one they chose. Initially, their plan was to create an even edgier version of Spyro with graphic violence and blood, but game designer Paul Reike had another plan. He had been tinkering with the idea of creating a game where you'd unlock playable characters by purchasing and scanning in physical plastic figurines, and with dollar signs in their eyes, Activision decided that this would be the perfect idea used to reboot our favorite Purple Dragon. again, great. Skylanders, Spyro's Adventure, was released in 2011 and to date is probably the most controversial thing to ever happen to this franchise. Once again, it was a complete reboot that scrapped everything from before and heavily redesigned Spyro to the point of looking downright hideous. But this time, even calling it a Spyro game at all was kind of a stretch. As I hinted at earlier, Skylanders kicked off the Toys to Life craze, a fad where the characters you play as in a game are scanned in through collectible figurines purchased separately. And with 32 of these figurines to collect, the focus on Spyro was a bit diluted, to say the least. His name may be in the title, but you can actually go the entire game without playing as him. And like I said, there's really not much else besides Spyro himself carried over from previous entries in the series. I mean, I guess there's sheep, but we're really stretching here, guys. I mean, he's not even centered on the box art. He's pushed off to the side on the cover of his own game, for crying out loud. This business model is pretty controversial too. Each of these figurines would sell for $10 to $15 a pop, and certain areas within levels would be locked away without access to certain ones. So you had to shell out quite a bit of extra cash just to 100% complete the game, which is crazy. It's even worse than your typical DLC. I mean, at least with that, you don't have to drive to a physical store and purchase some plastic bullshit you don't need. Skylanders games kept getting released on a yearly basis up until 2017, but Spyro's influence was pretty much all but gone after the first entry. He became nothing more than like 1 out of 100 different unrelated figurine characters and all but vanished from the marketing, soon completely forgotten by the franchise he once helped launch. This was a pretty dire time to be a Spyro fan. But luckily, in 2018, we were given a huge breath of fresh air. With the Toys to Life craze dying down, Toys for Bob left Skylanders behind and instead returned Spyro to his roots, with a full remake of the original PS1 trilogy that started it all. This was the first time that the original Spyro continuity had been acknowledged in about 15 years, and it seemed like things were finally back on track. The collection sold extremely well, public interest was fully renewed, and it seemed like all we had to do was just sit back and wait for the inevitable Spyro 4. And so we waited. And waited, and waited, and waited. And eventually, without even realizing it, Spyro had entered its biggest drought yet. It's now been 8 years since the Reignited trilogy supposedly saved the series, but we now know with hindsight that that was never really the case. Despite the remake collection selling like hotcakes, getting a new Spyro game greenlit was an insane uphill battle. Activision just wasn't interested in making platformers since they aren't as profitable as online multiplayer games like Call of Duty, where they can just shove in all sorts of microtransactions and loot crates and season passes to keep milking money out of the player. Toys for Bob were soon stripped of their autonomy and sent to the dreaded Call of Duty mines as a permanent support team, along with the other studios at Activision who had helped revive Crash Bandicoot a few years prior. It seemed like the Mascot platformer revival was over, made even worse when Microsoft bought and merged with Activision a year or so later, shutting down Toys for Bob like they do with all their good studios. Somehow, though, against all odds, things finally worked out. Toys for Bob managed to strike a deal that not only allowed them to remain open as an independent studio, but also work with Microsoft from the outside on a new game for one of their properties. That game ended up being Spyro: A Realm Beyond, which we now know is finally releasing next year. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still reason to be worried about this new game. The free flight mechanic seems a bit at odds with Spyro's platforming roots, and they deliberately avoided getting Stuart Copeland back to do the music, even though he vocally has wanted to for years. That's a pretty big bust in my opinion, but still, the fact that we're getting a new Spyro game in any form is a goddamn miracle. The future of Spyro may remain uncertain, but if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that nothing can extinguish this purple dragon for good. Microsoft, do not take that as a challenge. Don't make me regret saying that. Please, do not make me regret saying